Hello, everybody. Greetings, salutations. Welcome back for, this is part 3 of our deepest of dives into Free League's reboot of Twilight 2000. If you recall, yesterday or in the last stream, if you happen to be watching this later, out of potential chronological order, we wrapped up the player's manual, so now we can continue on to the referee's manual. Only one programming note, Alyssa Faden will be on tonight for my rare monthly, at the moment, nightly streams. So you're in here today, come back tonight. We'll talk about mapping, cartography, I'm guessing some Call of Cthulhu and minis, whatever else comes to mind. Should be fun. With that out of the way, let me just get right into the good stuff. A cool explosion on the cover. Let's see in the table of contents what we have. Oh, we've got solo rules. That might interest some folks. I know there's some folks who are very big into solo RPGs, so I'll definitely have to remember to hit that up in the appendix. Got the World of War. Your job as a referee. Encounters, factions and forces and scenario sites. Not going to exhaustively read through anything. As it is, probably going through whatever pace I do. It'll take me a couple of streams to get through it all. Well, let's start at the start, and then we can see from there. The World at War. Excuse me. I ditched advanced calculus and was smoking at a cafe when I saw the parachutes bloom over my high school as the Soviets began their invasion. Adults stood dumbfounded around me, coming out of the cafe, out of apartments, cars slowing to a complete halt. This was all the news had talked about for the better part of the year, but no one really believed it would happen. An old man in a tweed jacket looked at me and said, "You shouldn't be smoking, little girl." I laughed and pointed to the descending troops. "Yeah," I told him, "that's my biggest problem." Boom. Well, yeah, it's going down. Smoke him if you got him, fellas. The world is at war. We get a timeline, which is nice, starting in 1989 with all the Berlin Wall. I'm not going to read through all these, but let's see. We're leading all the way to the year 2000, which I will read. At the start of the new millennium, civil rule has ceased to exist in most of Europe. Many military units remain, mostly because they have the capacity to defend themselves and to survive in the harsh conditions. Many units recruit civilians into their ranks. In early April, word suddenly starts to trickle down the wire to the American troops in Northern Europe about Operation Reset, the first major offensive to be launched by the U.S. military in over a year. The plan is to link up the scattered remains of NATO troops in Poland and Sweden and make a massive push to seize the devastated capitals Warsaw and Stockholm. It starts out well for the U.S.-led forces, taking the Soviets by surprise and advancing with lightning speed, but it's not to last. After a triumphant week of NATO gains, the Soviet military, despite severely degraded command and supply lines back to Moscow, reacts and strikes back hard. Coordinated assaults of armor and artillery pound the native forces, and the offensive grinds to a halt on both sides of the Baltic. The U.S.-led forces fight desperately against the more numerous Soviets, leaving both sides severely battered in a bloody stalemate. In Poland, the U.S. 5th Infantry Division is pushed back and then crushed at Kaliz, the survivors fleeing into the woods. The final order from HQ is short and to the point. Good luck. You're on your own now. Ain't None Nothing says, the rarest of content, pro-smoking content. I suppose that's one way to look at it. So there you go. So there we've set the scene. Things have happened. Everything's pretty much gone to the birds. There's some final semblance of organized military forces, and when that falls apart, good luck. You're on your own now. All right, so I'm probably going to skip over the stuff about these specific places. Not so much that because it's a lot of text, and I kind of want to try to stick to the I don't want to say the interesting bits, because all this stuff is interesting, but maybe the more mechanical bits. But I think in terms of, if you're interested in looking at this as far as, hey, what am I getting in the referee's manual? You're getting a fair amount of text I'd say a lot. That's because it's pretty small print on the page about Poland, which is where I guess one of the campaign settings. So we have Poland and Sweden are the main ones that are presented in these materials. There's an overview. I don't know why I call it boxed, sort of offset in a sense text. I'll read that overview since it's fairly short and hopefully will provide an overview of what's in these pages. We paint with broad strokes now for, as we have noted, the scribbled lines on maps denoting place and function are but memories, yet they serve as a general way of dividing the country for purposes of the little intelligence available to any military anymore. Before this new war, Poland was sectioned into voivodeships or provinces. While some warlords claim they still rule these areas, such as the Baron of Warsaw, the provinces retain little actual meaning. Instead, intelligence breakdowns are typically by region with the drilled down town-by-town information where possible. This overview of Poland takes the former approach using cardinal directions, one of the few things mankind still counts on, as descriptors for areas that, in reality, are rarely united in any significant way. Think of it like a pre-war map of the United States where the names of states might be the same, but no practical borders remain. In effect, there is no Poland, just as most of the countries of the world have become theories, ghosts of a time when the world was bound by borders, treaties, and an all too brief peace. Provinces listed under the regions are for reference only. They do not reflect the current reality of Poland at war. So there we go. Now, nothing else says a ground war in Eastern Europe grinds to a bloody stalemate. Never saw that coming. Yep, no. Who could have guessed it? Nobody. All right, so we get the regions. Ooh, we have this nice 2-page. I don't even know what to call this. Is it a diagram? I guess it's sort of a list of the different symbology that refer to different military organizational forces. So you've got I'm not going to go through and read them all, but we just have symbols. These probably line up with the chits that were supplies. So we have corps headquarters, cavalry divisions, armored cavalry regiments, so on and so forth. We get first for Poland. On the next, that goes kind of on to the next page, but then there's also Soviet forces also. So it's really 3 pages. 3 pages of those designations. And it also gives, I'm not sure if we're meant to really use it or if it's just for flavor, a sort of, I guess, a zoomed out map that shows essentially where these forces are on a map of Poland. Now we get to Sweden. Let's read the overview of Sweden. It's probably going to say more or less the same thing, I'm guessing, but we'll see. From a demographics point of view, Sweden is a huge, long country with almost its entire population living in the southern part, centered around Stockholm and Lake Mälaren, Gothenburg, and Malmö. Or is that Malmö? I think the umlaut. My mother always schooled me, and the umlaut's like an U. Malmö. Somebody who knows Swedish could tell me how poorly and badly I'm butchering that name. Before the war, Sweden had a population of 8.8 million, and of those, barely 1 million lived in the northern 3/4 of the country. Apart from the Scania region in the far south, Sweden is mostly granite and immense pine forests that eventually give way to birches and endless moors north of the Arctic Circle. The Skandies mountain range runs along the border to Norway, peaking at a bit over 8,000 feet in southern Norway. On the border towards Finland, the landscape is much flatter. Bleak moors interrupted by lakes stretch all the way to Murmansk. In the 1990s, Swedish military industry was mostly known for making the futuristic-looking STRV-103 tank and world-class fighters and submarines. But the country's real ace in the hole was the coastal artillery. A separate service branch, the Kustartillery, dated back to the early 1900s and was dedicated to defending Sweden's ports that mostly lay deep inside fjords and archipelagos. The coastal artillery combined massive forts firing both guns and missiles, fixed lines of mines, and aggressive amphibious infantry to make sure those archipelagos were death traps. Another peculiar Swedish thing was the countless subterranean bunker complexes that were built in the 1950s and 60s. There were complexes for the Navy, for the Air Force, and the coastal artillery. The Army joked that their role was to stand outside all the nuclear-proof shelters and cheerfully guard the entrances against other things than nukes. And, of course, complexes for civil defense, state media, and local administrations. The government had several secret sites it could relocate to, in Stockholm, a hospital was built that had as many floors above ground as under. The idea was that the whole thing could go underground if it had to. So some really nice background in Sweden. I don't really know too much about Sweden other than the absolute basics. So that's cool. Some good flavor. And then we get some details on the war, the death of everything, and then some bits about what it's like now in Sweden generally before we get into the regions. And we have another sort of zoomed out map of Sweden, but this one has no military markers on it. Oh, now it does. So that was there, but now we do have an order of battle that places markers for NATO forces, Swedish forces, and Soviet forces on a similar map. Now we get some bits on other countries. Get something on Germany, France, United Kingdom, America, and then the rest of the world. Do we want to read what happened in America? I'll just read the first paragraph. The United States did not suffer the mass conventional battles of Europe, yet its descent into chaos and deprivation was only slightly slower, coming from nuclear strikes and the breakdown of society. The old system of democratic rule fractured along two primary lines of government, an emergency militia junta and the original civilian government. The vast majority of Americans fall under the aegis of neither. Instead, vast stretches of this huge country are under control, be it from former elected authorities, militias, communal-based councils, and other darker experiments in applied quote-unquote democracy. So if you think something like Why the Last Man, except of course there are men, or something of that nature, you can get probably a good sense of what it's like here. Or even The Walking Dead, I think probably would be good, minus the zombies. And in the case of the United States, it wasn't from conventional war, but nukes and societal fractures. Now we get to I'm not going to say the good stuff, but here's the referee stuff. Your job as a ref. When I was a kid, I watched PBS shows about World War II. All of them were in black and white. That's how I imagined war up until the real thing started for a third and final round. Thing is, the skies are often deep blue, beautiful even. In the winter, even under a gray sky, the snow can heap over the land like there is no war. It just covers everything up. No one will tell you about that. I'm not sure who I'd tell. But there are moments, real brief, when the world feels quiet again. I try to keep a mental picture of that. Film is too valuable to waste, but I like having it just for me anyway. Ooh, some brutal. Oh, Terrence throwing in a Hell Comes to Frogtown reference. Poor little out for Rowdy Roddy Piper. Already gone, I think, 5 or 6 years, man. It feels like it was just yesterday, but certainly that could be one point of reference for Twilight 2000 US is Hell Comes to Frogtown. There should be a mode of combat for just doing the sort of Keith David versus Roddy Piper fight from They Live. I don't even care what system it's in. Give me a game that can sort of simulate that kind of just knockdown, drag out, hit him in the balls type of fighting, and I'll figure out how to make it work in anything I'm playing, because I definitely want that in all my games. You are the referee. Your role is to help the players envision the world of Twilight 2000 in all its gritty detail. You determine what challenges and hardships the PCs will face, you control the NPCs they will meet, and you are the final arbiter of the rules of the game. It's a tough job, but very rewarding. This chapter offers you advice on how to do it, and the rest of the book contains plenty of useful tools. Darren says, Street Slugfest the game. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I do want to point out, see if I can pull it up really fast. Hold on a minute. I got some good comments from someone. Let's see. Hold on a minute. Let me get there. From Christian, who I think responded to the first stream that mentioned, I think they were talking that they are playing this, I think in Swedish, and with new players, and they ran into some issues, and they posted it on a forum. I should ask him which forum it is. I'm not sure if it's in Swedish or English, but that I think he said Tomas himself and some of the guys from Free League actually popped in to give some advice. I asked him what the advice that they gave was, and I think the upshot was that his players were inexperienced and kind of had a hard time with the rules, and the advice was to kind of ease them into it. So I think maybe one of the thing, and it may not say in here, but coming from the sources themselves as the ref is having seen all the rules in the player's manual and whatever mechanics are going to be on this side, that if you find that it's might be hard for your players to get into it, or it might be hard for yourself if you're a new referee, or maybe you're used to a different kind of game, is ease into the rules. I mean, it's something that's kind of, it's on the one hand, you feel like it's that you could say, well, this is kind of no-brainer advice, right? But I think a lot of times it's hard for people to want to say like, okay, I'm going to pair off the rules. But say to yourself, say to your players, hey, all this stuff in here that we're going over, we're going to, instead of just jumping in the deep end with everything, we're going to ease into it. So for the first few sessions, maybe we won't count ammo, but then we're going to come to a point where we are going to start counting it, or we're not going to count that was it cool under fire, but then, which I think it was the two suggestions that he mentioned specifically, is not using those up front, but then easing into them. And the one thing I would say is, that I think is important, and I think that something that I do think throws people off the loop a little bit in terms of 5th edition, and I'm sure it would for other games too, is if you are going to ease off the rules, if you do feel to yourself, hey, new players, new game, so I want to take it easy, I don't want to hit them full force, whether it's just rules density or lethality or one of those things, let them know up front. Because you really are teaching them the game, not only in terms of mechanically how to play it, but the kind of experience that you're going to get. So if you don't tell them these things up front, then they're going to get a misconception of the game that could be with them forever. Players in a game who feel like, well, this is too tough, or it's not supposed to be this tough because I've played it before and it was never this tough. The reality was it was supposed to be this tough, but DMs before were kind of taking it easy on them, and nobody let them know that, hey, we're going to play in sort of newbie mode or light mode, and then I'm going to be ratcheting it up. Instead, they just think that's how the game is played. So for all this stuff that we already covered, for the stuff we're going to cover, if you need to ease into it, if you need to simplify it for yourself, do it. There was, the designers apparently have said, absolutely, go ahead and do it. And of course, it's your rules. You bought the books. Do what you want with them. Take out what you want to take out. Put in what you want to put in. But if you are going to do things that are going to really transform the experience in some way, whether you mean to go back or not, in the case of new players, to ease them into the rules, or you just want a lighter game, make it player facing. Make sure your players know, so that later on when you do start to change things, you can again let them know, I'm going to start counting ammo now, or okay, I'm going to start using that cool under fire, or okay, I'm not going to re-roll critical hits when the enemies get them now. Let them know so that they're in the right mind space for what you're doing. Excuse me. All right. Back to it. Principles of the game. The purpose of the 8 general principles of Twilight 2000 is to help you create the right feeling in the game and to guide you when you are unsure of how to handle situations that come up. 1. Nowhere is safe. 2. Resources are scarce. 3. Players lead the way. 4. Rumors abound. 5. Everything is personal. 6. The end is never set. 7. Death is a part of life. So there are, and 8. Hope never dies. So they have paragraphs underneath them. I'm not going to read through them, but we get, in a sense, here are the principles you should be working for. These are the kind of things that you want your players to feel, that you want them to know when you are looking at decisions to be made, because usually, or almost always, there's a spectrum of ways the thing could go. When you're choosing as a GM, you need to choose which way to go, even with a random result. Something, you roll on some tables, you get some stuff. Usually you have to still to figure out the context. The tables can't tell you everything, or usually they don't. You got to figure out how to place it, how to figure out how it fits in. Think about these principles. Think about this. When you might be thinking, oh, I'm going to have all this stuff, and you start thinking about it, and you've got it all written down, and you're working it out, and you come back and you say, wait a minute, players lead the way. Did I lose sight of that in what I'm preparing? If I did, and it's looking now that I'm leading the way and the players are following me, then maybe I should rethink what I'm doing. Maybe I should look at a town or village or settlement, or wherever, where things can happen. Okay, maybe they're going to need some guidance. Oh, rumors abound. Yeah, I haven't filled up enough. Not enough of these NPCs know things about the world around them, so I need to fill that up, right? So keep these in mind. And I would say, even though this isn't the ref's book, I would say these also should be player facing. I would definitely write these up on a card or something and say, hey, players, these are the principles of the game. part of my session 0. Hey, we're going to play Twilight 2000. After I've said everything about it, okay, here are the kind of our goals. Here's how things are. Hand it over to them so that they know. So they can say, hey, look, Mr. GM, Mr. Ref, remember, players lead the way. So we're going to lead. Great. Hey, rumors abound. We should be able to find information about this stuff. Great. Because it's great to know, kind of, in a sense, almost setting your bill of rights in a way as a player. These are things you should be expecting. These are the directions things should be going. And for the GM to stay on point and stay kind of focused on what the game is. Now, Nothing says, hope never dies is an interesting goal. My default for this game would have been hope dies quickly. So let's see. So I will read that one because that is an interesting one. So it says underneath hope never dies, Twilight 2000 isn't only about pain and suffering. The darkness needs to be contrasted with the light of hope for a new and better life. Threaten the PC's dreams, but don't snuff them out. Even in the dark nights of World War III, there's always a speck of light on the horizon. So I think ultimately you should be able to think about, maybe the odds aren't great that you can do something. Remember back in the player's guide, they talked about having that kind of goal, a dream to accomplish. It should seem doable. This shouldn't be the game of just trying not to die as long as possible. It's not, as the game says, it's more than just survival. It's not just about, well, how long can you not die? It's, can you make something better for you out of this horror? So to do that, you have to feel like that better thing is possible. If you make it seem utterly hopeless that you can do anything, then kind of why are you doing this? Just lay down and die, right? If it's just, okay, we're just in torment and it's just whether I want to live for 5 days or live for 5 years, it's kind of a little bit of a letdown. But if you think like, man, it might be hard. There might be a 1 in a million shot, but there's a chance that I can make this thing happen, that I can find my way out, that I can build a town or whatever it is. I can find my way back from Poland to Portugal and get across there, whatever to do, that we can do it. So that hope is kind of, making sure that, hey, it remains possible. Don't just beat down everything and get too wrapped up in the darkness, of which there is, plenty. Okay, now we get to, we get a little thing here on Death of a Division. I'm not going to read it out, but it seems like some nice flavor. Another thing says, yeah, I like it. Hope Never Dies is an interesting theme. I just wasn't getting until they spelling it out. Yep. I mean, that's the nice thing about having these kind of goals put out there, is that they do kind of spell it out. And that's why I think it's great, not just as the referee to have it, but for the players to have it. So that they kind of know that as hopeless as it may seem, there should be some hope. And if there isn't, maybe it's when you talk to the GM and say, hey, GM, it's feeling like we can't do anything right. And whether that's, you've done that or not, remember the point of this game is not just that everything's going down, which is why I think it's good to have these things on both sides. Because when we talk about, if you run into issues with your players, or if you're a player, you run into issues with GM, oftentimes it's kind of trying to figure out, well, what kind of game are we playing? What are we doing? And these give you that, here's what we're doing. Blam. As far as hope itself, yeah, it's a nice touch to remember that you're supposed to be here for a reason, you're supposed to have a reason to live. And make sure that reason, that there's some life to it. Doesn't have to be there's a great chance, but there has to be, a chance. There should be able to glean some candlelight at the end of a long tunnel that you can at least go for, even if you're most likely going to fall short and die in the dark. Starting the game. Twilight 2000 is primarily designed for campaign play spread out over many game sessions. A short campaign can be rounded off in a half dozen sessions, and there is really no upper limit. It's certainly possible to run short one-shots with the game as well, but it's not the primary focus. Your first session as referee for Twilight 2000 can feel daunting. You have no written script to follow, no finished story to guide the players through. Don't worry. The game gives you lots of material for the players to sink their teeth into. Don't worry. Don't panic. Swig of tea for the working man. Okay, the Battle of Kaliz. The default way to start a campaign of Twilight 2000 in Poland is in the immediate aftermath of the final battle of Operation Reset, close to the Polish town Kaliz, with the PCs as part of the U.S. 5th Mechanized Infantry Division now scattered and running for their lives. An extensive intel report handout is included in the box set. It includes an operation order, op-ord, from the 3rd U.S. Corps HQ issued before the offensive, as well as a situation report, aka SITREP, sent from the 5th Division HQ after the advance has failed. If your campaign is set in Sweden, the PCs are instead likely part of the 2nd Marine Division, and the final battle of Operation Reset takes place near Urebro, and I apologize again as I'm trying to do my mother proud with those umlauts. I don't think I'm succeeding. A separate intel report is provided for this setting as well. To start the game off, decide the exact hex where the PCs start, give them the op ord and sit rep, read the intro text to the left, set the scene, and let the players go from there. So really, either case, what they're recommending is you're going to start in media res. In this case, the in media res, so some people might say the in media res is in the battle. So I think what a lot of GMs might do, referees might do, is put the PCs at either at the start of the battle. Say, okay, we're going to fight the Battle of Kaliz and then go from there. They're not doing that, which I think is smart. The problem was if you start at the battle or at the beginning of the battle is that gives the players a false hope that they can win the battle when we as the referees know that the only way this battle's ending is in failure. And that can immediately create a disconnect. I've had that happen in a campaign. We were literally dropped into a new world. Boy, excuse me for the coughing. My throat is really getting to me today. We were literally dropped into a new world, thrown into a battle. And the idea from the GM standpoint was we're going to lose the battle. We're going to get saved by these new people. And then, we're going to kind of be in their debt and in their service and we'll have to blah, blah, blah. Problem was that we kind of started winning the battle. It was really tight. But at the end, we were kind of winning to the point where he actually started them to retreat, but we were still up, which meant that when the savior forces came in, we weren't in a sort of submissive position. We were still standing tall. So we literally had some of the enemies who were already running away, run back, knock us unconscious, and then run away again so that he could get this outcome that we wanted. So the same thing for this. If you start at the beginning of the battle and the PCs are rolling great and you're rolling poorly, now granted, you're part of a larger battle, so you might be able to do something, but the point is you're still probably going to be constricting their agency to get this idea of them being on the run because they're going to make decisions and they're going to be doing stuff and they may be more clever and luckier and whatever than you plan. And suddenly you're looking going, oh my gosh, I don't know what's happening here, but either I got to start making more and more heavy-handed moves that are going to come across as heavy-handed. I don't think there's any way you can avoid it. At some point, if you set the stage, there's only a few tanks or this or that, and then suddenly a mass of tanks shows up to overwhelm you, it's going to look like you're being heavy-handed. It's going to come across as, okay, the GMs really wants us to lose versus, hey, I'm neutral. Starting it after the battle puts you in media res in terms of the overall action, which is the battle has failed, and there's this great decision point of which way do you go, where do you run, without putting into question what's happened. Everyone's going to take it as read because it's going to be part of the prologue, essentially, that the battle is lost. And you could even have some fun with saying, hey, what were you doing in the battle? Or how did you do? Or how did you get to this? Or how did you get to that? But the point is, we're still in the middle of it because that breakdown of the battle, when the battle falls apart and everyone's running, is still in the action. But now we can really honor all that agency instead of thinking, we're going to give them agency, but we're going to start cutting it off at every turn because we need this specific outcome. I hope that makes sense. Moving out. At the start of the game, the PCs are on the run. Their immediate goal is to get out of the area alive. From the intel report and maps in it, they know where the main enemy troop concentrations are. Let the players make a plan and execute it. If they are slow, increase the pressure by having enemy forces draw near. So another nice thing that you're going to have here, and I've kind of finagled in my own games, the players getting some kind of map of the area fairly early on, if not right away. Not a hex map, not the referee map, but just a very general map, just so that they can both kind of see what's around them, kind of give them the lay of the land. And also because you can put little points of interest, almost little plot hooks there that will just play in the players' minds. If you put the little symbol for ruins out there that somebody found and maybe a question mark, as if the cartographer might have gotten into view of the ruins, saw them, didn't dare go any closer, and just is like, I don't know what's here, your party's going to go boop, 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 and they're going to beam in on that to go to. Likewise, in this case, it gives them information to make an intelligent decision. If you don't have the enemies on the map, other than just east-west, if we assume that the Soviets are all east and the American forces are all west, which is probably a terrible assumption, but that's all you'd have, you're basically making a guess. Whereas if you could say on the map, okay, here's where they were, we don't know everything, we don't have perfect information, but we have enough information to make intelligent choices, which of course is what you want. Jaw. Thanks, Jaw. The U in it's almost like in burn is almost like a Swedish O. Try Urebro. Urebro. All right. Urebro. Thanks, Jaw. I appreciate that. Yeah, my thing with the umlaut comes back from way back in the day when Motley Crue was big. My mother used to always see walking around and she would see the posters for Motley Crue, and Motley Crue has umlauts over both the O and Motley and the U and Crue, and she would always say, "Look, it's Motley Crue." Just funny to me. She's German, so those pronunciations came a lot easier to them than they do to me. Almost. All right, I'll get there. If I can get some of the guys from Free League in here, maybe they can help me out with my pronunciation. They can give me a pronunciation primer. Okay, so we got moving out, we have planting rumors. When and if your players seem to falter as to where to go next, give them new information. Have someone they meet share a rumor, or let them pick up a radio transmission. Random tables for this purpose can be found in the next chapter. Such information can lead to meeting a faction or to scenario sites. To avoid railroading the players in a particular direction, feed them more information before they have explored all the locations they are interested in. Ideally, the players should always have 3 options in where to go next, all within 5 to 10 hexes from their current position. This is another great rule of thumb. Don't just give them information that's going to point them in one direction. Give them choices. And a nice 3 is one of those classic numbers. It's a nice number. It gives them enough that there's probably going to be 2 out of the 3 that are at least somewhat interesting to them, that are going to appeal to someone, so they have a real choice to make, as opposed to just, hey, this one looks great, this one looks terrible. Putting one sort of in between gives you that just more of a spread, but it's not an overwhelming spread. 20 choices, too much. 3 choices, it's pretty nice. Using the information. When the first session is over, things will already have happened. Conflicts have been established, relationships tested. Planning your second session, you'll have plenty of threads to pull. You'll have an idea where the story goes. Great. So that's all just for starting out. Obviously, once you're in the campaign, you don't really have to refer to this anymore, but I think it can be helpful, even if you want to kind of look back, right? Maybe the key points for continuing play is make sure your players have information. Give them rumors. Certainly in this kind of setting, there are going to be people on the road, other forces you're going to run into. If we were going to pull this out and use this in a fantasy setting, you could think about who might they encounter on the road, the old hermit or religious aesthetic, or if they happen upon a stronghold that's friendly. What do these people know? Keep feeding them that information. Keep giving them stuff. And then use all that stuff they have, including listening to what they want to do, to plan where to go next. Now down to preparing sessions. Before session 2 and later sessions, you can, if you want to, prepare a little more. Build on what you've established earlier and spend a moment before the session to ponder what might happen. You can prepare an event that builds directly on the events of the previous session. What's the next logical step? How will NPCs react to the PC's actions in the previous session? How can you escalate the situation, giving the player's actions real consequences? Right? So what do the PCs do? How is the world and the things in it going to react to what they've just done? Choose or let the dice decide on a random encounter or two. If you don't want to do it on the fly while running the game, think of how you might be able to modify the encounters to relate to individual PCs, their big dreams, and moral codes. This is a hint or suggestion that I think a lot of people come up with a lot, and I think it's a good one. Most folks, especially the OSR space, which tends to be where most of my audience is, aka you reside in, rely a lot on random tables, but it can be a lot to try to think about, incorporate, and act on random content in the middle of a game. So what you can do is roll it beforehand. Roll however many you think they're going to be. You can always keep extra. You probably, want to go over and say, I'll create 3 or 4 or 5. Maybe I'll only use 1 or 2, but then the next ones we'll just have. And then not only to do that, but then think about how this, because remember, the random part is on the referee side. That's in terms of the generation. Not supposed to seem random to the players. So before you take that random event or occurrence, whatever it is, throw it in the game, you want to think about, well, what's the context? How does it fit in? Doing it before the game also allows you to do as good a job as you can of making sure this stuff feels seamless. My goal with random encounters and all that stuff is that my players never know they're random. My players never know that, oh, he just rolled some dice and dropped this in here, that they think that it's planned. And I have to say, probably because my players are new, they've actually asked me, hey, were those there all the time, or did you come up with that on the fly? And I'm like, man, you'll never know. You will never know. As far as you're concerned, it was all there all the time. It's only for me to know whether I just whip that out. Excuse me while I whip this out. Prepare rumors or radio transmissions that will give the PCs information on locations to visit or avoid. Read up on any scenario sites that you intend to use or create them yourself. Good stuff. So we're going to get to scenario sites they have not covered yet. And the nice thing about in modern day, and that would be cool, I wonder what there'd be a way to do this if we were going to backport this to something kind of medieval, fantasy, or prior to the technology for radio. But the idea that you can have a radio and use it to get info, or info could come through on the radio, you could really have a lot of fun with that, because someone could do some kind of broadband transmission that just hits all the airwaves, which could be something really important. You don't want to use that all the time, but if you wanted to throw something really important out there, somebody could just have, just hit all the airwaves, basically all the different frequencies that people are using, and throw a message on there. Or your PCs could be wily and try to listen in on, say, U.S. military bands to see if anything's going on there, or on Soviet military bands to see, or Swedish or whatever, to see, kind of try to figure out where everybody is. And besides looking for positional information, they'll get some of that chatter, and that chatter will translate into rumors, things that you can use to put choices in front of them and give them information. Avoid preparing too much. The more detailed your plans are, the harder they are to adapt to the player's actions. 15 to 30 minutes of prep time before a session is usually enough. Wow, that's a 15 minutes. What are they assuming that I'm the GM? Trust the players and the mechanics of the game to create story and drama. This is a good one. I kind of wish they would bold that, make it, 80-point font and just put it across an entire page. Trust the players and mechanics of the game to create the story and drama. Really, the big one is trust the players. And then secondarily, I think trust the mechanics is a good one too. At least give them a chance. And then you can tweak the mechanics however you need. But trust that they're going to do it. Trust that by throwing this stuff out there and doing that part of the work, that your party is going to come through and do it. Trusting them is definitely one way you're going to reduce your prep time, because you could say, you know what, I don't need to create all these different things. I can put those pieces out there. The party will put them together. So therefore, all that connective tissue, all that extra work I'm going to put in, I can leave in the hands of my players. I trust them, And the other part is if you have these things that you use, by using the mechanics in hand, it's going to save you work, because if you're not using the mechanics, that means you're doing everything yourself. Non-player characters. I'm not going to read the intro here. We all know what non-player characters are. Handling NPCs. Technically, NPCs work just like PCs. They perform actions and sustain damage in the same way. But in practice, you should ignore all game mechanics for NPCs as long as they don't directly affect a PC. Don't track ammo or food for an NPC who tags along with the PCs. Instead, keep the freedom to decide when their resources run out for maximum dramatic effect. You don't need to roll the dice for actions performed by an NPC unless they are attacking or healing a player character. You can roll for the NPCs in other situations if it enhances the drama, but most of the time you can skip it. This is probably something that's going to be more on your style or not. I think some folks might even bristle at that and say, of course I'm going to track the NPC's food and whatnot. Because those do create drama in themselves, and I don't want to decide. I'm trusting, in some ways, if I'm trusting on the mechanics of food and whatnot, and that each day you plunk off a ration, why do I need to force it? I'll just let it come when it comes. Jaw says, how long prep time do I often use? It's a tough question. So I guess I probably will have two forms of prep time. There's formal prep time and there's informal prep time. I probably spend a lot in the informal prep time. Now, what is informal prep time for me? That's thinking about stuff, percolating in my brain, jotting down a note. Oh, this came up. This is interesting. What I've done, the streams on the recaps, those usually are gold mines of kind of informal prep. I'm not necessarily even writing a bunch of stuff down, but I'm just making a notation, or I'm deciding, oh, that's who this person really is, kind of type it down. So there's that. And that can be generally it's a lot of time, but it's time that for me I don't mind because it's usually in between other things. So for example, I'm on the train going to and from somewhere. I'll be reading stuff, and then this idea will come about the game. I'll quickly jot it down, but I'm not really focused on the game. Something comes, it comes, and I'll think about it and mull it over my brain, write it down. Then there's formal prep time where I might be doing stuff like literally preparing tables, formally preparing content that I'm going to use. That, on average, not very much because I don't do a lot of it. I do try to lean heavily on tables and things like that, which means I spend a lot of prep time up front getting all these things down. But once they're down, I don't need to spend any prep time. So I may spend a few hours at the beginning figuring out the geographic area, what hexes they are, all this stuff, the way it works. Then after that, it might be 5 or 10 minutes or less on a given week because all that stuff's kind of done. And I'm more in that I can rely on the mechanics, as they say in the book, and then kind of what the PCs are doing and those little bursts of inspiration that have come out. Now, the one thing I have to say, caveat, my games right now are very low pressure for me and easy for me to handle in this manner because my sessions tend to be short. If I was running a 4-hour session, I probably have to put more practical or say formal prep time than I do when my sessions are half that. I mean, usually at most my sessions are about 2 hours. It's just we're playing on weeknights. Everybody has families and obligations, whatever. That's just kind of how they roll. So I can do this for a 2-hour session. If it's a 4-hour session, it might be more. And of course, what my party's doing, my party tends to be pretty slow moving, pretty thoughtful, pretty, what's the word I'm looking for? They're pretty thoughtful about their decisions so that I know that of that 2 hours, they're not going to be just running willy-nilly over the map. They're going to be thinking, pondering, making decisions, discussing things, making a move, rinse and repeat. So that kind of helps me too. So, it's all going to be dependent. Now, nothing says, I would trace the food, but if I wanted to have GM Fiat drama, I just say the NPC loses his food or an animal gets it, etc. Yeah. I do like, and I'm not anti, hey, looking to increase the drama, looking to increase the tension, because I think it is a game, and that's part of the game part. Because I do feel that fundamentally, I like trying to model some kind of reality, quote unquote, but it's a game. So I'm not trying to absolutely, systematically simulate reality. And part of that game part is that in games, just like in popular fiction and culture, things tend to happen at times that make them really interesting. I try to weigh both. Maybe, so I would try to look at and say, how much food do they have? Ooh, what's happening? Then maybe, I might say, oh yeah, somebody stole their food, they say, or whatever. But I try to do that when I really feel like it's something. Otherwise, I think it's also interesting just how the cookie crumbles. Hey, this NPC had 8 days food and it was only a 4-day, 5-day journey. So it seems like it's not going to be a factor, but then they get lost and other events happen. Suddenly it's a 10-day journey. Now the NPCs run out of food, and I'll just go with that because there's as much inspiration for just how the dice happen to fall on those things as much as when they happen. But sometimes if there's just a perfect moment, I wouldn't ignore the perfect moment because I'm trying to stick to some nope. I can't touch it. Like, yeah, if the perfect moment's there, I'm going to try to take it. I'll try to make it work. Make it work somehow in terms of everything. Because again, it's a game. NPCs in combat. As a general rule, NPCs follow the same rules as PCs during combat unless otherwise stated. However, in order to minimize bookkeeping and avoid slowing combat down, a number of simplified rules for minor NPCs are included in Chapter 4. I don't remember if I mentioned those or not, but they're here also for our reference. You are never obliged to use the simplified rules. For key NPCs, it's often worthwhile to use the full rules, just like for PCs. And then we just have some simplified rules. I'm not going to read through them. If you're interested in them, they are here for you. But they've broken down some simplified rules for initiative, group actions, ammo, suppression, explosions, damage, stress. Boy, I got to blow my nose, but I got no tissues around, so it's going to have to wait. I'm falling to pieces here on stream. Gauging the opposition. As a referee, it's your job to make combat exciting by making sure that PCs face challenging opposition. The random encounters, next chapter, all indicate the number of opponents, their skill, and their gear. Thank you. My wife off screen has thrown me some tissues. Thank you, mademoiselle. But feel free to modify these factors to calibrate the difficulty of the encounter. As a rule of thumb, a group of PCs in decent shape will generally be able to defeat a group of minor NPCs of similar size and gear using the simplified rules for managing NPCs in combat. Will give the PCs an additional slight edge. Sometimes the PCs will face overpowering opposition. Remind the players that they can flee from combat and don't necessarily need to fight to the last drop of blood. If the players insist on fighting despite bad odds, let the chips fall where they may. Players should never feel that their PCs are invulnerable. So more good stuff. Seems like you can use the simplified rules if you want to run them as more minion style, aka they're kind of like normal versions, but they're maybe a little bit weaker, which is fine. 4th edition D&D had that concept of minions. If you haven't heard of it before, they are basically versions of creatures that had 1 hit point, pretty much the same offense and defensive capabilities. They just had 1 hit point, but you had to hit them directly. So if they took splash damage, indirect damage from something, they would keep going. So you didn't necessarily know which ones were minions. So I know some DMs would really just call out, oh, here are some minions. I didn't. I like to kind of have that little bit of a mystery. 8 goblins appear. How many of them are minions or not, and kind of what do you do? But the key point is you hit them once, they go down. So in terms of their impact on the battle, they're just going to last, unless they're super lucky, kind of like a pawn in chess. They're not going to last very long. And because of the hit point differential, the odds are the PCs will be able to take them out. If you put 5 PCs against 5 minions, unless the minions are super lucky, the PCs should win. And it seems like something similar is here, though probably not quite as simplified as the minion rules. And yeah, remind your players, especially in a game like this, flee, retreat. A tactical retreat is not a terrible option. Sometimes it is the best option. Use it. No reason to fight to the death, or there's usually no reason. Live to fight another day is almost always preferable. And here is some basically box text going home. If your PCs are mainly U.S. soldiers, a strong motivation for them will likely be to find a way home to America. This can be a long-term goal for the players. Future expansions to the game will explore the USA of the year 2000 and will also include information on how to get there. For now, the U.S. soldiers in Europe are stranded there. All right, cool. Well, nice to know that stuff is coming. If you don't feel like homebrewing your own ruined U.S., or for now, stick to Europe. I mean, you can always do it yourself, but now we're into encounters. Chapter 3. I'll see how far I will get into this because I'm cognizant of only having 12 minutes left. I'm okay to go a bit over, but, I don't want to keep folks too long. I don't want to outstay my welcome. I hope I am welcome, though. Diaz had a fever and was out. Everyone else was off foraging or scouting except myself and Toofer. I was going to kick him awake when I saw the Soviet soldier, but the soldier held a finger to his lips and made a cutting motion across his throat. He was the kind of skinny you get from not eating for a long time. He crept up to Toofer's sleeping bag and pulled out a long blade. I froze. The Russian smiled and raised his blade. I don't remember shooting him, but I must have, because the next thing I knew, Top was calmly telling me to ease down, and the firing pin was clicking on an empty chamber of the revolver. Whoosh. It's a tough moment. They're not pulling any punches with these moments. This chapter details 52 random encounters. I'm guessing 52 is not a random number for random encounters that you can use during the character's journeys across the war-torn lands of Europe. The chapter also includes a table for typical NPC stats, as well as random charts for scenery, rumors, and radio messages that you can use to immerse your players in the world of Twilight 2000. These 52 encounters are also summarized on the custom cards included in this box set, which we looked at when I did the unboxing. You can go back and check out that unboxing video if you'd like to see what the cards look like physically. These 52 encounters are also summarized on the custom cards included in this box set. Oh, I think I just read that. Sorry about that for repeating myself. To randomly generate an encounter, simply draw a random encounter card from the deck. The encounters are described in more detail in this chapter. If you don't have access to the custom card deck, any typical poker deck can be used to generate encounters. Of course, as referee, you are free to choose encounters instead of drawing them at random, or ignore these pre-made encounters altogether and create your own. All right, so you saw from the box set. Oh, jaw. That's cold jaw. Is it a strength or stamina roll to fix the dripping nose? Special skill? I think it's maybe strength if I'm trying to pull it back up into my nostril. Stamina if I'm trying to ignore it and keep streaming. Luckily, I can't actually see myself unless I really look and I'm small on the screen. So hopefully if there is something creeping from crevices, it's mostly out of sight and therefore potentially out of mind. So I'm going to say I made my checks. All right. Frequency. Typically, you'll draw at least one potential random encounter per shift. So that is, I believe we said it was, 6 shifts, 4 hours each shift. So every 4 hours drawing they call it a potential random encounter. So I'm interested in what that means. Does that mean that you might draw? I don't remember if we saw that there were blanks or how that will work, or if there's some other role or mechanic to do to see whether a random encounter we draw becomes an actual random encounter as opposed to just a potential one. I assume we shall see momentarily. Oh, nothing. Clearly has been paying attention. Need human spare parts to fix. Yep, that's it. I don't know if that exists under general, or maybe we have to make a custom set of spare parts. Spare parts, human. Certainly if we wanted to do Twilight 2000 combined with the island of Dr. Moreau, animal parts and human parts, that would be very good. I wonder if you can do things. Can you get to a point with your, say, medic skill where you could do something like, replace someone's kidney? And then you might need to find the kidney. So yeah, that would come down to human parts. Spotting. The characters generally have a chance to spot an encounter before it's upon them. This is detailed under the rules for keeping watch, which we saw in the player's manual. There you also find a table to determine the distance at which the encounter occurs. Notice that those things, the distance and that thing, are player facing. So the players, it's the idea is, we want them to know what these encounter distances are like. On-road and off-road. Each encounter is marked with the on-road symbol, the off-road symbol, or both. These symbols indicate if the encounter can take place when the characters are traveling on a road, off-road, or both. Okay, I saw that on the encounter cards. I thought the tree might mean forest, but it means off-road. If you draw an encounter without the symbol matching the character's current mode of travel, no encounter occurs. Okay, that's a cool way to do it. So if you're on the road and I say, it's been 4 hours, I'm going to draw an encounter card, and I draw one that's purely off-road, no encounter. Same thing if you're off-road and you draw one on the road, no encounter. So that's a way of balancing your encounter draws. I guess that's why they say potential, because if you get one that doesn't match what they're doing, then they get off. So that's kind of cool. Also, some encounters with both symbols are different depending on if they occur on-road or off-road. In general, it's more likely for characters to encounter large groups of soldiers and others while traveling on roads. Of course, traveling off-road is slower. So here we have a built-in advantage. I don't know if they mentioned this in the player side, but I would want this to be player-facing as well. That off-road, lesser chance of encounters, going slower. On-road, quick, fast, but you're more likely to be spotted because things are also using the roads. So you have that trade-off. And I would want them, if it's not mentioned in the player's handbook, I would definitely want them to know. I would add that in. Night and day. Each encounter is also marked with a sun symbol, the moon crescent symbol, or both. These symbols indicate if the encounter can take place during the light shifts, typically morning and day, or the dark shifts, typically evening and night. If you draw an encounter without a symbol matching the current shift, no encounter occurs. Fewer encounters have the moon symbol than the sun symbol, meaning the PCs are less likely to meet others while traveling at night. Traveling at night presents other difficulties, however. So again, another way they're able to manipulate the odds, but not having multiple dice rolls. So you're going to pick one card, but there's one card, and presumably we don't know what the odds are. It'd be interesting to know what those odds are. Just as a GM, I kind of wouldn't mind if here it would say, hey, when you're looking at that 52 deck of cards, one pull, there are X amount of this, X amount of that, and so the odds of this or that. I think it'd be just cool to know. I could probably break it down by going through the cards myself, but I wouldn't mind knowing. It's kind of part of the design ethos. Here's how many we figure will come up on average. But I like it that they simplified everything down to using essentially one roll the dice, or one, in this case, card pull that gives you a lot of different options without having to say like, oh, roll dice now, roll dice again, and run roll dice a third time. Stationary players. If the players remain in a hex for a shift, draw one random encounter. However, only events marked with the, I guess this is camp symbol, will actually be triggered. Other encounters are treated as no encounter at all. This does not mean that staying still is safe. Quite the opposite, in fact. The longer the PCs remain stationary, the higher the risk is that one or more of the main factions in the area will learn of their location and approach them or attack them. For each day that the character stays stationary after the first, roll on the stationary encounters table to the left. Add +1 of the roll for each subsequent day during which the PCs have remained stationary. The same rules apply for PCs who have established a home base. So essentially, if you stick around, even though you might not see anybody, the sign's going to get out there. So this is, again, abstracting things like somebody walking by as a distance and notices your campfire, and they're not interacting with you in the moment, but they're going off to tell somebody else. Or somebody sees your campfire in the distance, or maybe someone's got a high point and notices your tents, something else. Or they come across, while you're doing something, they kind of come across you and do it. So they're basically, instead of saying we're going to roll all kinds of dice for that, we're just going to make one kind of rating. But obviously, the longer you are somewhere, the chances are one of these things has happened, and then someone's going to know. And then going down to the stationary encounters list, we have stuff like, hey, you might get just a regular encounter. You might get refugees or stragglers, or scouts show up, or a large a large force. And then we get a table here of typical NPCs, refugees, civilians, hunters, marauders, soldiers, officers, special forces, intelligence services. For those who were kind of US, and you get Soviet versions of same, Polish of same, Swedish of same. And then get some animals. It looks like, at least in terms of Poland and maybe also Sweden, we're likely to run into wild dogs, wolves, bears, or vipers. And wolves cannot be dissuaded or persuaded. I'm not sure what persuading a wolf looks like, but neither can vipers. And so vipers, bears, and wolves cannot be persuaded, but dogs can. I think I'm going to close it off here. Any last thoughts? Anything from the chat before I get into kind of the list of encounters? One, the list of encounters is not as super important. I could probably just flow through them, but this is a good stopping point. Don't want to get too into it. I think there's a lot of helpful advice so far in the referee manual. It looks like we're probably about a third of the way through. I appreciate the advice that they've given in terms of starting your campaign and kind of things that you're aware of, and certainly the kind of design goals of the game, I think, are all very useful to know. Tables, I'm always in love with tables, and there's a good amount of those. I'm really digging the kind of card layout of these events because, like I said, it's really able to encapsulate multiple roles. Whereas I might say, hey, in this hex, roll for an encounter. And okay, there is one. Now roll for this other one. And now roll for something else. And this bottoms it down to kind of different things. So you can really, having that kind of off-road camping, off-road or on-road, day or night, camping or not, gives you a lot of ways to really have some interesting either variations of encounters or encounters. And you can think about, for example, to take it to a fantasy version, okay, I want to have robbers or marauders work here too. Where are marauders going to be hanging out? They're not going to be hanging out off-road. They're not going to be hanging out in the middle of the woods. Why? Because they want to maraud. They want to steal from people, and people aren't really going to be out in the woods. And if you do run into the odd person out in the woods, probably just going to be one of them. They're not going to have anything. It would be silly. You're going to camp out in some part of the road. So I could write up that encounter and say, hey, marauders, but it's only going to be if you're on a road, and it's only going to be potentially during the day, because at night they've gone somewhere secluded to camp. So maybe that would be a different encounter, but it wouldn't look the same because you wouldn't be, say, a marauder ambush if it's at night off-road, whereas maybe their encampment is off-road at night, kind of thing. So really cool. Really gives you a way of really doing a lot. And again, you're able to present the information all in one spot. So you can just make one information block, whether it's on a playing card like they have it, or whether it's in some kind of table that kind of gives you all kinds of things. So instead of having to do, say, D100 with all this kind of stuff, you can really add some extra detail and then say, hey, if you roll that, then that also enters into your odds of having an encounter. If I know I'm going to roll on a D20 and I'm going to have 10 things that are on-road and 10 things that are off-road, means there's a 50% chance if you're on-road or off-road that you're not going to get an encounter, which gives me my odds of an encounter totally are 50%. So it's kind of easy to play with those, but it all gives you the information very succinctly. So I really like it. Jaw says, day 2 as stationary, I only draw a random encounter card if I have a 1 to 4 on a D6 roll. Well, let's back up to there. So what you're going to do is after the first day, you're going to add 1. So day 2, you're going to roll a D6. I think it's a D6, right? And add 1 to it. So if you're adding 1 to the D6, the minimum you can roll is a 2. So 2, 3, or 4, yes, you're just going to draw a random encounter card. If you get over 4, then you're going to go with one of the other ones. So after 4 days, you're no longer going to get just an encounter normally. But the random encounter one, remember, it's only ones that have that camp symbol. So you still, those first couple of those low numbers, there's probably a fairly good chance you're just going to get nothing. You're just going to be 0. Because I think there aren't that many. I bet you there aren't that many camp symbol encounters. So you still have maybe, I don't know, I could guess 30% chance of having an encounter. I'm rolling that number. So the odds are good, you're still safe. But you know that as those days are drawing on, more likely you're going to get stuff. And stuff that's going to raise the tension, right? Whether you're getting refugees, that definitely is going to raise the tension because you got more people to feed. What are you going to do with them? All those kind of decisions. Stragglers of the same nationality as you are show up. They're going to be wanting stuff also. But as the note here says, they act friendly and will share rumors, but will take the first chance to steal from the PCs and leave. They're not your buddies, but you could probably play that out if you want to convert some to NPCs that are hanging around. And then scouts from a faction showing up and then a large force from another faction showing up. So the longer you're hanging around, the more sense something bad's happening. But yeah, in that first couple days, when you're not adding a bunch of modifiers, you still have a pretty good shot of just getting a normal encounter and not a high chance of that. Awesome. Well, thanks everybody. On your way out, if you could give the stream a thumbs up, I appreciate it a lot. Hit the mic stand. If you found yourself in here and you weren't subscribed and you'd like to, or you want to stay informed about what I'm doing here on the channel, hit the subscribe button, and there's that bell icon you can hit if you want to be super notified. I really don't even know what it means, but it's there. I feel like if you just subscribe, you get notified, but maybe the bell does something more. The bells. Tomorrow, since today is Thursday, so you might think, ooh, there's more to go in the referee's manual. If you're watching this live, if you're watching this or listening to this later, this will mean nothing to you. But if you thought tomorrow will be more of this, actually, you'd be wrong, because tomorrow I will be doing my regularly scheduled Reddit roundup for OSR stuff. And this is a video or a stream in which I go into the OSR subreddit, read through what's going on, talk about it with you folks. Usually we find I think almost every time we find something good. I mean, there are lots of people are putting out lots of great stuff, so it's really more about, do we actually find it? That'll happen, and then I will pick up with maybe the rest of this. I'm not sure. We'll see what other meetups, but I'll pick up on Monday. Of course, if you come back later, these will probably be done, and you won't have to wait, and you can just go straight to it. Anyhow, have a great day, night, whenever you're watching or listening to this. Game on.